I understand this sounds too good to be true, and that is why we're heading to the database of games to prove the point. Now here we are starting off with a pawn to d4 move. In most cases your opponents are going to respond symmetrically, and then you sacrifice a pawn with pawn to e4. Again, in the vast majority of the cases your opponents are certainly going to grab it. Then you continue with knight to c3, aiming to get this pawn back. Your opponents will usually defend it by going knight f6. Again, a little later I'll tell you what to do if your opponent goes sidewise, but for now let's just follow along the main line. Now here you play bishop g5, putting pressure to this knight and therefore kind of renewing a threat to this pawn on e4. This forces your opponent to play bishop f5, protecting this pawn once again. And at this point you make a very tricky move, which is queen to e2. And at first it looks like you're just trying to add more attacks against this pawn on e4, and perhaps you want to trade off this knight and then get back the pawn on e4 by capturing it. Your opponent thinks that that's what you're about to do, but in reality you have another thing in mind. And here you can see that the most played move by black is queen takes d4, and that is already a losing error. Now queen d4 is of course a very logical move for your opponents to play, because first of all they're grabbing a free pawn, secondly they overprotect this pawn on e4, and it feels like a great solution. But in reality, there is no such thing as a free lunch. We all have to learn it at some point in life, and for your opponent, the time has come. You play queen to b5 and you win the game. After this, there is no way out for your opponent. This is a double attack to the king, this bishop on f5, but also the pawn on b7. And it's not just about the pawn, because from there you're going to grab the rook on a8. Therefore, this is a triple attack actually, and your opponent is defenseless. In most cases, they're going to notice this double attack and they're going to try to save the bishop by going bishop to d7, but then you take this pawn on b7 and you attack the rook. They try to defend it and bishop c6 is the only way to do so, but then you play bishop b5. Because the pin is mightier than the sword. Now the bishop is pinned, meaning it can't capture your queen anymore, it can't get off this diagonal. And the most played move is queen b6. They're desperately trying to solidify their position, but it's quite a funny ending here actually. You play queen c8 and that is just a checkmate. Despite black concentrated all of his forces around the king and around your queen trying to stop this, but somehow your queen managed to sneak right into black's king bedroom, and it's game over. There are a couple of things that I love about this trap. One of them being the fact that it's not very well known. Like, I'm a grandmaster, I've been playing chess my entire life, and I have come to know this trap just recently, even though I don't know, maybe you guys knew it for a long time. If so, let me know in comments below, but to me it feels like not a very well known trap. Also, it feels like a much more superior version of the England Gambit. The England Gambit, in case you haven't ever faced it, it's when black goes e5, and this is a trap that black tries using here. After pawn takes, knight c6, and there is indeed some similarity. Black is also pretending to attack this pawn, but in reality they hope to play this queen b4 thing. But when black plays that, this is actually a shady opening that just hopes for white to fall for the trap, and otherwise black's in trouble. Versus when you use this as white with an extra tempo, it is actually a lot more powerful and objectively a lot more sound. The big difference is when you use it as white, you have your pawn already on d4, therefore it does not obstruct your development and you have this freedom to bring your pieces into play quickly and to begin attacking. Once again you play e4 gambit in this pawn, as he captures you play knight c3 hitting the pawn, they go knight f6 and you play bishop to g5, putting pressure down this diagonal and possibly threatening to capture the knight and regaining the pawn. They guard it, you play queen e2, pretending like you add one more attacker, but in reality you have this queen b5 move in mind. And after this, as we discussed, there is no way out for them, because if they just cover the king somehow, you can either capture this pawn and go after the rook, or you can straight away capture the bishop in one move, at least winning a piece. Therefore, bishop d7 is more or less forced, then you capture this pawn on b7, hitting the rook. What can they do now? They can't play queen d5, because that square is controlled by your knight. Bishop c6 still seems to be making a lot of sense, but then you play bishop b5, pinning the bishop and therefore attacking it. Since the bishop is attacked, not only it can't capture your queen, it also means that it does not guard this rook anymore, and therefore you threaten either to capture the rook or to capture the bishop right here that is attacked twice, and therefore again there is no easy way out for black. We have seen that queen b6 leads to this queen to c8 checkmate. Queen d7 might prevent this checkmate, however after this you still take on c6 and black is once again at a dead end. What can they do? Capturing with a knight would drop this rook on a8. but capturing with the queen would lead to the very same checkmate, queen c8. Finally, trading off bishops certainly is not going to make their life easier, because after this you bring this stallion into play, which in fact makes their situation even worse. Because now not only you keep threatening the rook and potentially this check, but now you also threaten the queen on d4 and this pawn on c7. And that is just way too much for black to handle. If they do something, whatever, you're going to capture a lot right on the next move. For example, queen d5, if they hope to somehow x-ray this rook and defend it, then you could win in multiple different ways. The fastest is queen c8, still going after the king, and after queen to d8, there's another sneaky checkmate, knight takes c7. What if your opponent does not fall for the trap? Well, first of all, I gotta say that I know there will be some anxious guys who are gonna rush into playing blitz games and crushing their opponents straight away without waiting for the end of this video. In this case, guys, just don't forget to come back and let me know in comments below how did it went. Now, what if they don't take on d4? Well, they could of course play something else. Your plan, generally speaking, remains to be the same. Queen e2, besides putting pressure to this pawn and possibly threatening queen b5 in some variations, also simply prepares longside castling, which is a very good move for you to play, and you're going to play it. So let's say your opponent plays something very solid, such as pawn to e6 or any other developing move. Basically, in that case, you are going to castle. By the way, when they play pawn e6, the nice thing is that they voluntarily pin their own knight, which is also nice for you. Either way, you're going to castle queenside, and after they play something, let's say bishop e7, again, your opponents are trying to be very solid and defensive. Basically, you are at the crossroad. You've got two options, both of them are equally good. The one is, you can just get back this pawn on e4, which was kind of your initial intent of playing queen e2. You need to trade off this defender, bishop takes f6, and now this pawn is attacked twice, but is defended only once, therefore you can go ahead and capture it. Now you regained your sacrificed pawn, and now the material balance is equal, the position is equal, life's good. That is one simple solution. But if I take this back, there is also a more aggressive solution, which I personally prefer better. This is to keep playing in a gambit style, where you don't seek to get back material, but you seek to attack. Then you play pawn f3. And now you threaten to capture the pawn, therefore they have nothing to do but to take, which enables you to develop a knight with a tempo. And now this is indeed a gambit, you're down a pawn, but you have nice attacking chances. By the way, let me also address the elephant in the room. If you turn on Stockfish and it tells you that this is -1 for white, and you think, oh, this is unsound, let's not forget that Stockfish is being really insightful here. It counted that white's got -1 pawn, and it tells you that this is -1. That is the whole logic behind it, okay? Nothing super genius here. But for humans, it's much easier to attack than to defend, and therefore being down a pawn is no such a strategy. Okay, so let's say they castle, and then your plan basically is to chuck these pawns forward and to attack on the king side. You can't play g4 straight away because he's going to capture it, so you do play knight e5 first, putting your knight to this nice central square, and also getting ready to play g4 on the next move, which you are going to do after virtually any move of black. We're going to play pawn g4, and now you're gaining a tempo for your kingside storm. Black is actually already in trouble, even though they tried to play very safely and defensively. What can they do? They can't ever take this knight on e5, because after they strayed, that is actually a discover attack of the queen, and we hit this knight, and we're still hitting the bishop. That is too much for black to handle. Therefore, they'll have to move the bishop back, but then you just keep with your pawn storm. And now h5 is not only aims to somehow attack the king, but straight away we're going to capture this bishop on g6. Therefore, if they wish to save the piece, they have to play some awkward move such as pawn to h6. And it is awkward because it allows you to trade there, ruin their pawn structure. Also, now this pawn on e6 is handy, you can go ahead and grab it. And after that, you just have this winning attack against the exposed king, and your pawns are already very far away into the game. I'll show you a possible variation, which of course you don't have to remember. Maybe your opponents will play something else, but your attack is just very quick, and it's very hard for black to cope with it. If the king stands here, you can just play bishop d3 and take aim at all these weaknesses. We certainly never worry about them capturing here, because that walks straight into a checkmate on the next move. Therefore, we are not worried about that. And otherwise, what can they do? I checked the database. There are actually a couple games that went right into this position. It is the most played line. And if they go rook e8, you can continue with h5, just increasing pressure along this diagonal. And after knight f8, you take here, check. The king has to move. You go inside with queen f7. And now you threaten with all kinds of sacrifices right here. and even if black tries super hard to consolidate the position, it fails, you still sacrifice the bishop right here, and on the next move, that is a very fancy pawn checkmate after a pawn to g7. By the way, it's not that we've been trying to be fancy. Queen h7 did not work because of, the knight. Therefore, g7 is actually the only move, but of course, it's a very beautiful checkmate. So far, so good, but I understand that some of you guys will write in comments that my opponents played just something very different. How dare they to do this? Anyways, we're going to talk about this. Therefore, what else can they try to do here to avoid the main line? Let's say knight f6, you go bishop g5, possibly threatening to regain a pawn. If they just play pawn e6, then it's not a good idea because again, they enable this pin. And you can take advantage of the pin by getting the pawn back straight away. The knight is pinned, you attack it, and clearly that's not a good option for black. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but they're clearly not gaining any advantage here. What else can they do? If they don't play bishop f5, they still need to develop somehow. If e6 is not a good option, what else can they do? Knight c6 maybe, trying to develop the other knight. That walks right into d5, kicking this knight away. Therefore, it's not a good idea as well. If the knight comes forward, there is a standard follow-up queen to d4, pushing this knight away. Also adding one more attack to this pawn on e4, and after the knight goes, let's say you castle, life's good, you have dominance in the center, you're putting pressure here, your bishop is ready to come out and deliver this check, you can take back this pawn anytime you want to, like, your position is just great. Some people complain that the world has become too materialistic, and indeed some of your opponents will play pawn f5. They've been super greedy here, they just don't want to let you get this pawn back at all. What do you do then? Well, the f5 move is actually a move in the wrong direction. It weakens a whole lot of squares around their king, which is a permanent long-term weakness. And generally speaking, you just wish to play f3, trade it off, bring the knight out, and after this you've got a great game. You could play this straight away with an absolutely great position. You can see that you're ahead in development, you've got all these diagonals for your bishops to quickly be brought into play, and your opponent is stuck right there with just a bunch of weaknesses. However, I love to also throw in this funny move bishop g5. Basically, your plan remains to be the same, to play f3 on the next move and to keep your normal development and attack. But bishop g5 prompts your opponents to sacrifice their rating by going pawn h6, because that is the most played move. They do hope that your bishop is going to come back, but what they overlook is this counter-strike queen h5, and at this point, they're going to realize their blunder, but it's too late. The thing is, they can't play g6 anymore. With a pawn on h7, that move g6 was possible, but now it doesn't make sense, you just capture it. Therefore, queen h5 forces them to play this absolutely awkward move king d7, centralizing their king, and it is absolutely exposed here. Moreover, it got in the way of all the other pieces of black, therefore he can't really develop. After this, you can play bishop c4, adding one more piece to attack these weak squares, and black is kind of stuck here, because they can't even take this bishop, the pawn is pinned. Otherwise, it's unclear how can they possibly untangle their pieces. Knight f6 is also not good, you can just take it and then take this pawn and continue your attack. Also, that might be a forced win for white, but either way, I mean, it is a sure win. Some guys tried queen e8 here, offering an exchange of queens, but of course, you're not going to let them to get out of here so easily. You can play bishop f7 and shut down this intent. The queen has to come back, and now you follow up with another really funny attacking idea, queen g6. You just sneak right into your opponent's position and you threaten queen e6 checkmate. And again, there is no easy way for black to defend here anyhow. Queen takes f5 is also a threat. Say they go knight f6. To block this move, now you can at least capture a pawn with check, and after the king moves, you just keep checking it. King goes to d6. And I'll let this be a little puzzle of the day. It is white to play and win. Of course, white can win in multiple different ways, but what is the quickest way to win? Please write it down in comments below. Having said that, some people will still throw rotten comments at me saying that I'm a grandmaster, but I'm teaching these cheap opening tricks. And I'm with you guys. I actually do agree that, of course, opening traps is not the real way for chess improvement. If you wish to get better in chess, chess is a strategic game, I do recommend that you check out my free masterclass by clicking the link up there, where I reveal how I think to find proper moves while playing a game of chess, and you can steal my thinking process and apply that to your games and hopefully progress much faster.